It was a routine night on the city streets, one that many drivers experience countless times without incident. But for one unregistered vehicle, a simple traffic stop quickly escalated into a confrontation that would leave both parties shaken. What started as a standard check for vehicle documentation ended with arrests, raised voices, and threats that would later spark debate among legal professionals. According to official police records, the driver had no valid registration, and the vehicle had been previously flagged in unrelated incidents. Yet what unfolded during those minutes would challenge the boundaries of law enforcement authority and raise questions about legal rights that even seasoned drivers might not fully understand. But here's the question. Did this traffic stop follow the law, or did it cross constitutional boundaries? Let me know your answer in the comments below. To understand the full scope of the incident, we need to first consider the legal framework surrounding unregistered vehicles. According to the Department of Motor Vehicles and Traffic Enforcement Guidelines, driving an unregistered vehicle is a violation that carries potential fines, impoundment, and, in certain jurisdictions, criminal liability if the violation is persistent or coupled with other offenses. The law is clear. Officers have the authority to stop and investigate vehicles lacking valid registration. However, the manner in which these stops are conducted is governed by constitutional protections, including the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. According to the incident report filed by the local police department, the vehicle in question was spotted late in the evening, operating without visible registration tags. The officer initiated a traffic stop, signaling the driver to pull over safely. The report indicates that the officer followed standard procedures, including announcing the reason for the stop and requesting documentation. The driver, whose identity has been withheld in public records for privacy, complied with the initial instructions, but reportedly became agitated when questioned further about the vehicle's registration. Official records indicate that during the stop, the officer requested to inspect the vehicle for insurance and registration verification. At this point, tensions escalated. Surveillance footage from a nearby streetlight camera shows the driver repeatedly asking why additional questions were necessary and challenging the officer's authority. According to the report, the officer warned the driver multiple times about compliance, citing potential legal consequences for failure to provide requested documentation. This raises a crucial legal question. To what extent can an officer insist on additional information during a routine traffic stop? Legal scholars note that while officers have broad discretion to ensure public safety, the scope of questioning is limited by precedent. In the landmark case Rodriguez v. United States, the Supreme Court ruled that prolonging a traffic stop beyond the time necessary to handle the initial violation requires additional justification. One interpretation is that officers may request further identification or conduct a limited investigation if there is reasonable suspicion of another offense. Another perspective raised in court is that any escalation without reasonable suspicion could be viewed as a constitutional overreach, potentially invalidating subsequent arrests or citations. Returning to the incident, the report states that the driver refused to provide additional information, prompting the officer to place the individual under arrest for obstruction and noncompliance. At this juncture, according to the report, the driver made verbal threats toward the officer, which were recorded in the officer's body camera footage. Legal analysts emphasize that while threats may constitute a separate violation, they do not justify excessive use of force or unlawful detention. The tension between enforcing the law and respecting constitutional rights became the defining moment of this encounter. Public reaction to the incident was swift once the footage and reports became available. Legal forums and social media platforms debated the conduct of both parties. Some argued that the officer followed all legal procedures and acted within the scope of authority. Others contended that the stop escalated unnecessarily and that the driver's rights may have been infringed. A lawyer familiar with traffic law who reviewed the footage and police report noted that while arrests for unregistered vehicles are legally justified, the manner in which the stop unfolded raised questions about proportionality and procedural fairness. To better understand the legal stakes, it is important to consider the specific statutes cited in the arrest report. Under state law, operating a vehicle without valid registration is a misdemeanor offense. Officers are authorized to issue citations or take the individual into custody, depending on circumstances such as prior offenses, risk to public safety, or noncompliance. In this case, the arrest was justified under the statute. However, the threats and verbal altercations complicate the narrative, introducing potential civil liabilities and considerations of due process. The body camera footage provides additional context. Visual evidence confirms the officer maintained a professional posture throughout the encounter, giving repeated warnings and instructions. The driver, while agitated, did not physically resist. The lawyer analyzing the situation explained that while verbal non-compliance alone may not always result in arrest, repeated refusal to follow lawful orders can legally escalate to detention. This distinction is critical for understanding the line between constitutional rights and lawful enforcement. A key turning point in the incident occurred when backup arrived at the scene. According to the police report, the presence of additional officers allowed for a controlled environment, preventing further escalation while ensuring the driver was taken into custody safely. Legal commentary highlights that the arrival of backup is standard procedure for potentially volatile stops, emphasizing officer safety while mitigating risks to the public. One interpretation is that the stop demonstrates both the legal authority and the procedural precautions necessary for such encounters. Another perspective raised in court is that even with backup, prolonged stops for minor violations can become legally sensitive, particularly if they infringe upon the driver's rights under the Fourth Amendment. The aftermath of the arrest included the filing of charges for operating an unregistered vehicle and obstruction. Public records indicate that the driver's legal counsel has requested a review of the arrest procedures, arguing potential violations of constitutional rights and questioning whether alternative measures could have de-escalated the situation. Legal experts note that cases like this often hinge on nuanced interpretations of law and procedure, and outcomes can vary based on the jurisdiction, the judge, and specific circumstances. Given the facts, do you think the officers acted within their legal boundaries, or does this raise a larger issue of accountability? Share your thoughts in the comments. The broader implications of this case extend beyond a single traffic stop. Lawyers analyzing the event point out that it serves as a reminder of the delicate balance between law enforcement authority and individual rights. Routine traffic stops, while seemingly mundane, are legally complex interactions. They involve constitutional safeguards, statutory obligations, and real-time judgments that can have significant consequences for both officers and civilians. After the arrival of backup officers, the situation began to stabilize, but the tension in the air was palpable. According to the official police report, officers carefully positioned themselves around the vehicle to prevent sudden movements and to maintain a clear line of communication. The driver was instructed repeatedly to exit the vehicle and place their hands in view. Body camera footage shows the driver hesitated, expressing frustration, but ultimately complying with the officer's commands. The presence of multiple officers ensured that the stop remained controlled, but it also raised questions about whether the escalation could have been avoided with a different approach. One critical legal aspect to consider is the doctrine of reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Law enforcement officers are allowed to detain individuals and investigate when they have a reasonable belief that a violation of the law has occurred. In the case of an unregistered vehicle, the initial stop clearly satisfies this threshold. However, the continuation of the stop, the request for additional information, and the eventual arrest for obstruction bring into play the limits set by constitutional law. According to traffic law experts, each step must be carefully justified. An officer cannot extend a stop solely based on personal suspicion or to teach a lesson, but must rely on observed facts, previous records, or credible evidence. During the stop, the driver verbally protested the detention, questioning why the situation escalated from a simple registration check to an arrest. In some instances, this type of verbal non-compliance alone would not constitute grounds for arrest. However, when combined with repeated refusal to follow lawful instructions, the officers interpreted it as obstruction. A lawyer reviewing the case emphasized that the interpretation of obstruction can vary between jurisdictions, and minor disputes can escalate quickly if officers are following strict procedural rules. The arrest itself was conducted according to departmental protocols. Officers informed the driver of the charges, handcuffed them safely, and transported them to the local precinct for processing. At no point, according to the body camera footage, did officers employ physical force beyond standard restraint techniques. This detail is significant as it highlights adherence to procedural law while ensuring safety, both for the driver and the officers. Legal commentary on this type of stop often examines whether the officer's actions align with precedent. In Florida v. Royer and Rodriguez v. United States, the Supreme Court established clear boundaries for traffic stops and detentions, emphasizing that prolonging a stop beyond its original purpose without additional justification may violate the Fourth Amendment. One interpretation of the present case is that the officers acted within legal limits, citing repeated non-compliance as justification for the escalation. Another perspective suggests that while the stop was legally initiated, the sequence of escalation, multiple officers, prolonged questioning, and arrest could be scrutinized in court for proportionality and necessity. An additional point of legal concern arises from the threats made by the driver during the stop. According to the arrest report and verified body camera recordings, the driver issued verbal threats toward the officers. While these threats are taken seriously, legal analysts note that verbal threats alone, without accompanying physical action, are treated differently depending on jurisdiction and the nature of the threat. The driver's statements were documented in official records and may factor into ongoing legal proceedings, but they do not retroactively justify any excessive force. The distinction between lawful enforcement and reactive overreach is a core theme in legal analyses of this case. The public response to the incident has been mixed. Social media platforms featured discussions of the event almost immediately, with some viewers supporting the officers' strict enforcement of traffic laws, while others questioned the proportionality of the response. Legal professionals have weighed in, noting that cases like this illuminate the complex interaction between statutory authority and constitutional safeguards. One lawyer highlighted that every traffic stop involves split-second decisions that can carry significant legal consequences, both for the individual stopped and the officers involved. Another turning point in the event occurred during the processing of the driver at the precinct. Police records indicate that the driver continued to question the arrest and requested clarification regarding the legal basis for detention. Officers explained the statutory violations, including operating an unregistered vehicle and obstruction. From a legal perspective, documentation and transparency during this stage are crucial. Accurate records ensure accountability, provide evidence for potential court proceedings, and protect both officers and civilians from allegations of misconduct. Importantly, this incident underscores the value of legal counsel. A lawyer familiar with traffic law reviewing the case emphasized that understanding one's rights during a traffic stop can influence outcomes significantly. Drivers are advised to remain calm, comply with lawful instructions, and seek legal guidance if they believe their rights are being infringed. Conversely, lawyers also note that officers are trained to follow procedural rules strictly, meaning any non-compliance can quickly escalate legally. The interaction between individual rights and law enforcement authority is delicate and must be handled with care on both sides. As the day progressed, the case gained attention not only for the arrest itself, but also for the threats recorded on camera. Lawyers analyzing the footage noted that this scenario is a textbook example of the legal complexities that can arise from routine traffic enforcement. Even minor violations can trigger constitutional questions, potential civil liability, and public debate. While the statutory violation, operating an unregistered vehicle, is straightforward, the circumstances surrounding the stop demonstrate how legal interpretation, procedural compliance, and human behavior intersect in unpredictable ways. In conclusion, the incident of the unregistered vehicle stop illustrates several important legal lessons. First, officers have clear authority to enforce traffic laws, including detaining drivers and issuing citations for registration violations. Second, the manner in which enforcement is carried out must respect constitutional limits, such as the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Third, the presence of backup officers, documentation via body camera, and adherence to procedural rules are critical in ensuring both legal compliance and safety. Given the facts, viewers must consider the broader implications. Did the officers act strictly within the boundaries of the law, or did the stop and subsequent arrest raise concerns about proportionality and civil liberties? Could this situation have been de-escalated differently while still ensuring public safety? These questions lie at the heart of ongoing legal discussions and are why cases like this are frequently analyzed by both practicing lawyers and law students. Finally, for those watching, this incident serves as a reminder of the importance of knowing your rights during traffic stops, the potential consequences of non-compliance, and the legal avenues available if you believe a violation occurred. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth legal breakdowns, investigative analyses, and professional commentary on events where law, procedure, and human behavior intersect.